In 1620, while the Mayflower was in Provincetown, 18 of its men sailed in a small shallop, searching for a place to live. They came to present-day Eastham, where they were met by a group of Nauset. After a brief but violent encounter, the English left towards today's Plymouth. In 2020, we remember this first encounter. We explore its meanings for today and tomorrow.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Sunset Series. We're very happy to welcome tonight Joanna Buffington, who is been living in Eastham for 10 years, and she's now the chair of the Eastham Board of Health, and she's also the clerk for the Eastham Conservation Foundation. We're very happy to welcome you, Joanna.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and I'm happy to be here. We've had some gorgeous sunsets. I was lucky enough to be kind of introduced to the Outer Cape back in the 1990s. Bought a house here in 1993 and was lucky enough to be able to retire in 2010 from after 20 years of service as a disease detective and medical officer with the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. Moved here in 2010 to begin my retirement and quickly got busy with many town committees, with Audubon volunteering and learning that we had a local land trust, the Eastham Conservation Foundation. Learning about that came about because of specifically my house on Samoset, where I knew when it was built in 1960. I bought it from the original owners. It's the middle of 5 little houses on the marsh, and I knew even then that the tide occasionally came into the basement. These homes were all built in the late 50s, around 1960, at a time when many cottages were built in places that you wouldn't be able to build now. And not only was I, in the buffer to the marsh, I was actually in the marsh. There were turtles coming out and nesting in the backyard because it was still dry enough. Occasional high tide would come into the basement. And I thought, gee, this house really shouldn't be here. I'm in the marsh, and my family thought I was crazy when I said, you know what, after me, nobody's going to be able to, do laundry or flush the toilet in this marsh, because I'm going to take this house down and I'm going to donate it to a land trust. So that's how I found out about the Eastham Conservation Foundation. And actually what spurred me to do that was my first winter in that house, January of 2011. And I have pictures of a nor'easter storm, huge tide, and 2 feet in the basement. The water level came up to within 1 inch of the bottom of my furnace, which was built on cinder blocks, actually, when it was built in 1960, because they knew the tide was coming in and out. Well, this was really close to knocking out that raised furnace. So I started looking into options on how I could, protect that land. But I loved living there. So I discovered the land trust, and I met with the land trust director and some other volunteers with the land trust. And they said, well, you could give us this property, but we don't want a house on it. And I said, well, obviously. So I put together plans to be able to take the house down, and I had a life estate because I wanted to live there till the end. I could, pop things up on stilts. I could, manage if it was just me. So I did. I gave away the land and the house with a life estate, so I could live there for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And then 2018 and 2019, that winter, you might remember, more storms. My furnace did get knocked out. The tide came up high enough to knock out the furnace, the pump, the water. The well was already high sodium in the marsh. So it was this message of my life estate should go. And so looking back to when 1620, when people first came to Eastham, it looked pretty different. In 1950s and 60s, a lot of cottages built. In fact, Now I'm on the Board of Health, and there's rules in place for how many bedrooms per 10,000 square feet, and what's the smallest land you can build on. And by the time those regulations were set, about 70% of Eastham was already over that, and you couldn't take it away. You couldn't do new houses on anything less than a half acre, but all of these cottages, well, I had an acre out in the marsh, and even where the house was well under an acre. But I thought, well, I'm going to take one down, and that will help as we see higher and higher tides, and there've been some public hearings about the flooding of Samoset Road, Dyer Prince, Bridge Road, more and more storms that wash out the roads. We've seen that, and my action for my property on Samoset, at the time I did it, I didn't really know much about.
Well, good for you, but I hope you live many years before we get to tear that house down.
Well, no, actually, I've given up the life estate early because it's going to come down, hopefully this fall.
Oh.
I thought I'll manage. I'll put a new pump and furnace up on more cinder blocks, and I could have done that, but I actually found another really magical place, and I never thought that would happen. So I was able to move, and now I can actually get to see my vision for that small property. It was supposed to be when I was really gone.
Now, before this segment ends, I really wanted you to tell us about the Conservation Foundation. How many
Right.
You must control a certain amount of acres. What does the foundation do?
Right. The foundation began in 1978. A small group of conservation-minded landowners around Eastham said, gee, we need to be protecting some things more as things were getting built bigger and bigger. So a small group formed this land trust in 1978, and there are over 300 acres now in Eastham that are specifically protected by the Eastham Conservation Foundation. That includes a lot of marsh areas, but a lot of what would have been buildable upland. But in places where there are wildlife corridors, there are turtles nesting, there's things that shouldn't be built on, but those of us who get visitors and residents here really enjoy that it's open space and wildlife protected.
Well,
So
all
we
of
do
us who
that.
live here and all who vacation here are very lucky to have you doing that for all of us.
Yeah.
We're nearing the end now, and I just want to be sure to encourage everybody who's been listening to keep this in mind, to be always remembering our environment, our need to preserve this for future generations. There's many specifics you can do, but the most important is to have that whole ethos or that whole mindset about us. You live in Samoset Road at the moment, and that's very close to First Encounter Beach. In 1620, the Nauset people had quite a verdant place here on this peninsula, and we proceeded to do all kinds of things to it over the intervening 400 years. So we
Right.
look forward to seeing you in a new living place,
Yep.
to having more conservation land in our town. Thanks for joining
Right.
us, folks.
Great, and see some of the marsh get reclaimed a little bit, and see what you can do, even if it's a little bit. It's important for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Joanna Hollick, and I'm the coordinator for the Sunset Series with Eastham 400. I'd like to give you a brief update on our plans for the rest of the summer regarding the Sunset Series. Each Sunday, a presenter will read an excerpt from Ian Saxon's book, The Story of the First Encounter at Nauset, and some of the other episodes for the week will reflect on themes that correlate to the topics that Ian discussed in that chapter of his book. Other episodes will continue to focus on current events, important dates in history, and meanings for today. If you're interested in finding a specific episode or a series of episodes that are related thematically, you can now do so on both our website and our YouTube channel. To find these thematic groupings on our website, you can go to the Sunset Series page on eastham400.org and then scroll down until you see a list of all of our thematic groupings and click on the name of the topic that you would like to look at.
You can also find these same groupings on our YouTube page if you go to our channel page on YouTube, Eastham 400, and then click the playlist tab. Thank you.